Hi everybody, it's Dr. Peter Georgievsky here from GMA Fitness Academy and Global Taekwondo. Hope you're all doing well wherever you are watching this. And the reason why I'm coming to you on the screen today is I wanted to talk about a topic in relation to polarity and how it's connected to quite literally everything around us. And what you want to understand about polarity is that it is unifying in nature and not separating, which is what we tend to see these days. And this is why I wanted to put this video together. It's my passion, I guess, in this case, to show you the unifying nature of polar opposites and not just the conflicting nature that we tend to see out there in the world around us. For example, when we have people with difference in opinion, they're conflicting in nature, they're polar opposites, you would say. But in doing this and seeing it in this way, we get polarized ourselves, and that this doesn't help the situation or the scenarios and the things that we are observing in our world around us. So what I urge you to do is understand how polarity works in our universe and how we can utilize both aspects of something in order to find that middle ground and then find a unified solution to fixing the problems at hand. So without getting too deep into that, let's talk some brief aspects about polarity, just to get everybody on the same topic and the same mindset. So first and foremost, what is polarity? Now, we can view polarity in many different ways, but let's look at it simply put as two ends of a magnet. If you have one end of a magnet that is negatively charged, you would say it's the south pole, and the other side positively charged, you would call it the north pole. Now, if anybody's ever played with magnets, you know what happens when you put two poles of the same caliber together. You would then have the south pole and the south pole pushing each other apart. And we all, I'm sure everybody has taken two magnets and tried to force them together and then watch them throw each other apart. So we have two of the same things tend to repel each other. And it's interesting to note that the same repels, but the opposite side, it connects. It's like two pieces of a puzzle. They connect together. And so when we view this, we see that negative aspect connecting to the positive aspect. We also see this in the atomic nature of the world around us. When we see atoms, for example, and how they behave, we have atoms that we have protons, we have the electrons, and we have the neutrons, for example. Now, there is a lot of other things that are involved within the atomic structure. You have antineutrinos, quarks, semi-quarks, all of that stuff. We're not delving into all of that right now, but the point is to understand just the basics. So we have our electrons, and their electrons are negatively charged, and we have our protons, which are positively charged. And then we have those neutrons that are neutral, hence the name, neutrons. So what we have is we have the electron tends to gravitate towards the proton, and it will cycle around the proton. Now, what happens when an atom has too many electrons? Well, what it will do is it will try to find another atom that balances it. So we see these connections between certain atomic structures, and we see it with like hydrogen and oxygen. They will share particles within each other to create H2O, which is water, or different elements, hydrogen, H3, for example, and without getting into chemistry. The point being is that negative aspect of an electron will seek out a positive aspect of a proton in order to blend together, in order to create harmony within its structure. So when it doesn't have harmony within itself, it seeks out something to basically couple together with. And in doing so, they create that puzzle piece together. They fit together. And now let's look at this in the world around us. Now, the simple and easy one to be aware of is the male and female bodies. We have a masculine body and we have a feminine body. And in two coming together, we have then procreation, which then is how kids are born. And sorry if anybody's watching this that didn't understand that. That's how kids are born. But now let's look at that dynamic and look at the world around us and how things, for example, within the emotional state. Now we have same-sex marriage, for example. What happens there where two of the same-sex people come together? Well, they're obviously not going to be able to procreate with themselves because their body structures are too different, two of the same. They need the opposite end to procreate. So procreation is not possible, but they find love within each other. And this is a very interesting and beautiful thing to observe because this is something that bypasses, and we see this in nature as well. It's not just synonymous to the world within the human world around us, but it is within nature as well. And so what we have here is we have two opposite energies. And this is important to understand now. We have the physical body, which is masculine and feminine, and we have positive and negative. Now, if you want to understand the polarity here, we have the male body, which is positively charged, and the female body, which is negatively charged, or more negatively charged and more positively charged. Remember that we have both. We have both male and female energy within the same body, just like an atom has both electrons and protons, and we are made of atoms, okay? So we all have an atomic structure in some way, shape, or form, and we will either be more negatively charged or positively charged. And then it's our ability to find that harmony within ourselves in order to find that harmony within the world around us and within our inner world. And when we find this harmony, we have good health, we have a good level head, we don't get overly stressed over things, and things don't polarize us, for example, and we don't get manipulated by the media to believing fear this, for example. A little bit of bias there, but you get what I mean. The point is that when we are harmonious within our own body, we are able to perceive the world around us completely separate but connected at the same way. We can see this side and we can see that side, and we don't have to choose one or the other when we're sitting in the center. We can just observe and see what happens, or we can decide to follow one path or the other. So now, coming back to masculine and feminine energy. So we have masculine energy, we have male energy, we have that positive charge. In Chinese medicine, you would call this yang. Yang is positively charged, and yin is negatively charged. Now, if you've ever seen a yin and yang symbol, you have the two polar opposites. You have the yin and the yang, so that would be the yang there, the positive charge, and then you have the yin on the other side, which would be the negative charge. And within the biggest aspect of yang, you have that little bit of yin. And within the biggest aspect of yin, you have that little bit of yang. This is to understand that there is always a little bit of everything within everything. Nothing is ever just one side or the other. Everything has balance. It's just depending on what side of the spectrum that you're looking at and how balanced it is that generally creates its makeup. So now let's look at the body itself. We have positive charge, we have yang, and we have yin within our body. We have the left and right brain hemispheres, and we have the left brain which is supposed to be more analytically minded, it's more mathematical, more calculated, and then the right brain, which is very creative, very in touch with nature in a sense, and feeling and emotions. So we have these two polar opposites of the brain in a sense and what they control. And then, for example, if you didn't know this, the right brain actually controls the left side of the body, and then the left brain controls the right side of the body. So somebody who's ambidextrous has a good balance within the body. Somebody who's only right-handed may have a very left-brained thinking process. Now, it's not to say everybody who's right-handed tends to think very analytically, but look at the world around us. Most of us tend to think very analytically and very calculated. We are very left-brained in some ways, but then we are also very right-brained in other ways when we give ourselves the ability to be. So neither is right or wrong. They are both complementary. Understand that they're both part of the same thing. And at the center is that unifying point. And so I drew it over here, that little central point there, so that you understand what that is. It's that neutral point, that central point that allows you to see both perspectives. And when you bridge the gap between the proton and the electron and the neutrons in between, and you come from that central point, you find that harmony within the world around you. Going a little off topic there, but keep this in mind. So now let's look at then nature. Within nature, we have fire and we have water. So we have two polar opposite elements. Okay, and for those of you who've ever studied elemental theory, whether it's within Chinese medicine and the 5 elements theory, or whether you're talking about it in the 4 elements that you see in certain cultures like fire, air, water, and I think it's earth. I'm not familiar with the exact thing there, but for example, alchemists and alchemy of that time would talk about this sort of thing. So sorry, just give me a second, everybody. And so moving forward in this, we have this polarity of fire and water. They are polar opposites. They are also complementary in nature. When there's too much fire, you need water to quench it. When there's too much water, you need fire to evaporate it. And they work within each other. And so when we put these two things together, we have that polar opposite attracting each other. But at the same time, when one is blaring and blaring and blaring and blaring, there's not enough of the other. There's not enough time to cool it down. It can get out of control. If we have too much water and too much cold nature in the world, then there's not enough energy to create fire. Fire is very small, very minuscule, and you can see this. If you go to the depths of the Eskimo lands of like Alaska, for example, it's very hard to start a fire outside in the middle of Alaska because all of that cold wind and cold air will just blow it out. You can't have a massive bushfire in the Alps in that sense. I mean, you can, but the environment has to match it. And then you go to a really hot climate. It's very easy to start a fire, but it's very hard to find water. And so you see this polar opposite in the world that we live in as well. So you have the hot and the cold, the dry and the wet, and so on. And so you have polarity. But understand that polarity is just a descriptive viewpoint of the exact same thing. It is all part of the planet itself. The planet as a whole has polarity, but it is one in nature. And so it has a left and a right. It has an above and a below, and so on and so on. And so the human body has the same thing. We have the left and the right brain hemisphere. We have the positive and the negative. We have, and not to say good or bad, just positive charge and negative charge, masculine versus feminine. The right side tends to be focusing on the feminine. The left side tends to be focusing on the masculine. And it's important to understand that because the left hand, in a sense, is masculine in nature, but the left brain controls the right side, and the right brain controls the left side. So what's going on there? Have a think about that. So we see this in Chinese medicine that the right side relates to the blood system, which is the yin, and the left side relates to the qi, which is yang. So looking at that polarity and understanding that, we can understand that the body has polarity as well as unity. Okay? So now let's look at something completely different. If we take, for example, something that's completely out of left field now, and we take numbers. Now, you might have seen the video that I posted earlier in relation to numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, and things like this. What I want you to bear with me here is I want you to understand there is not just polarity in everything around us, but complementary polarity. Remember, fire and water are opposites of each other, but they complement each other. Without one, the other ceases to exist, in a sense. Doesn't, but understand this. So we need polarity. Within the electromagnetic fields and the radiation that comes from the sun, which is the light source, certain plants will ingest the electric wavelengths more than the magnetic wavelengths of light. And in doing so, they feel better. Sorry, the light just turned on above me. There you go. And so what happens is that we have polarity in plants. Plants will choose one source of nutrient over the other when they're photosynthesizing. It's interesting to understand then when we're looking, for example, in sunlight, that we also have the electric fields tend to be the more harmful radiation from the sun that we don't want in our body. It will then produce the skin cancer, and the UV rays, and all of these are electric in nature to some degree, and the body does not enjoy or like that. But the magnetic waves are also then relating to then the vitamin D that we absorb through the sun and all of these sort of things. So understanding that duality there is within the sun as well as within the universe around us and within our bodies. So when we look at this, for example, in numbers now let's take the numbers from 1 to 9. 1 represents itself, but its polar opposite is actually 8. And you might think, okay, why? And I'll explain. If you saw the video that I did in relation to the number theories, we have polar opposites in numbers as well, and it's so interesting to note this. When you use digital compression in any number, now if you don't know what that is, it's basically when you take any big sum and you compress it down to its singular form. So it's absolute singularity. What is the one number that it can compress to? Now, in order to compress it to one digit, looking at our digit system, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 is the last digit. And then we have 0, for example. Now, when we are compressing numbers from 1 to 9, what happens is 9 actually takes the role of 0. 9 and 0 are paired, and 1 and 8 are paired, 2 and 7 are paired, 3 and 6 are paired, and 4 and 5 are paired. And we see this when we, for example, if you were to take the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, and so on, and if you were to compress it like I did in that previous video and put it on that 24 clock, what will happen is the exact opposite sides will always be the exact value that will equal 9. So without getting too far into this, you will have 1, the opposite will always be 8. And it's not just synonymous with the Fibonacci sequence, but also within the Lucas sequence, the Fibonacci sequence, and that entire 1 series that I mentioned to you earlier. And then when we look at it in the Pell sequence, for example, and we use that digital compression, we see the exact same thing happening, this pairing of the numbers around us. We have the pairing of 1 with 8, with 2 and 7, with 3 and 4, and so on and so on. And what I want to share with you, just as a little bit of and if you indulge me here, is the pairing of 2 and 7 is very interesting. Let's take the number 2. Now we can see the number 2 in our binary sort of system. If you take the number 1 and you multiply it by 2, it becomes 2. Then multiply it by 2 again, it becomes 4, then 8, then 16, then 32, 64, 128, 512. These numbers might be familiar to you. Well, that's because if you've ever taken a memory card or an SD card out of a computer, that's the number of terabytes or megabytes that they tend to come in. They tend to come in this doubling sequence from 1 megabyte, then 2, then 4. It's never 3, if you've ever noticed it. So you see this doubling sequence in that manner. So you have 1, 2, 4, 8, and then we come into 16. Now let's compress that number. It will be a 7. So 1 and 6 plus each other come to a 7. And then 16 to 32, 3 and 2 become 5. Now 32 becomes 64. And you can write these down if you like. 64, well, 6 plus 4 equals 10. And then take 10, 1 and 0, it equals 1. And what happens if you follow that sequence, you will create a code called 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. Now that is a very specific and unique code. Now you'll notice also within that doubling sequence and compressing that to infinity, it will always repeat those exact 6 numbers. What's missing, however, if you take a look and you notice what's missing, is the 3, the 6, and the 9. Now, I'll do another video in relation to that, and I did one on my Instagram if anybody wants to follow. It's Path of the Dragon's Tail. That's where this, obviously this YouTube channel is called. I do have an Instagram with that same name. If you want to have a look at that video, I've posted it up there. So, that being said, now we have this code of 1, 2, 4, 8, and 7, and 5. Now, what's interesting to note is when we take the number 7, for example, and we divide it by any number under 7. Now, if we take 7 divided by 7, it will equal 1. But if we take 7 divided by 1, it will generate a code after it. And I'll give you the exact code, and I'll just bring up my calculator here. Now, you'll find a similarity to the binary code that I call. So I call it the binary code, the binary sequence, if you will, of 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. The doubling sequence is another name for it. But if you take 7 divided by 1, it'll equal 7. If you take 7 divided by 2, it'll be 3.5. Now, if you take 1 and divide it by 7, you will generate a code of 0 point, and I'm going to read this out, 142857, 142857, 142857, and it repeats and repeats and repeats. Now, if you take 7 divided by 2, as I said, is the other way around, but if we go 2 divided by 7, it will be 0.2857, 142857. So it just starts at a different point, but it follows that cycle. And so there's a reason why I want you to understand this. 142857, 124875. We have 2 codes that are generating here. Sorry, just pop my head up. We have the fraction 7 code and then the binary code. And you notice that they're very similar to each other. Now, what happens is the only way to understand this is let's take 6 points around a circle. And what we will do is we're going to plot the numbers of the doubling sequence 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, and 5 around this circle. Okay, there it is there. Now, what happens is that if you look at the opposite ends, 1, its opposite is 8. As I said, they are paired. 2, its opposite is 7. And there's your 4 and 5. And now if you take them, they will all equal 9. Now we think, okay, well, where's the 3 and the 6? Well, they're right there. And I'll show you here. 1 and 2 equals 3. 2, just go around this way. 2 and 4 equal 6. 4 and 8, compress them together. 4 and 8 is 12. 1 and 2 equals 3. And so you find your 3 and 6. And now let's look at the designation. 6, its opposite is 3. 3, its opposite is 6. I can't make this stuff up, guys. This is what happens when you use this. Now we think, okay, well, that's interesting. A little bit of a nugget for you. But now what I want to show you is this. And this is just to express the polarity of the numbers and to understand the polarities, not just within our body and the magnets around us, but in the world around us. And within everything there is a polarity of opposites, but they complement each other. Understanding this, they are complementary systems. I'm going to take that binary sequence, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot a path following the fraction 7. Okay, and you might have seen this because we go from 1 to 4, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1. And we create that little symbol there. Okay, and you might have seen this somewhere before, it doesn't really matter. But we go from 1, 4 to 8, 5, 7, 1. And we're following the fraction 7 code. Now, when we take the same circle and we draw another circle right next to this, and we think, okay, let's reverse it now. Let's put the fraction 7 code around. So we're going to start with 1, 4. We're going to go around the circle, 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. And we'll go around in circle. Okay, just like so. And we think, okay, well, let's have a look again. 1 and 8 are still polar opposites. 7 and 2 are still polar opposites. And 5 and 4 are still polar opposites. We've just flipped them in a different way. And if we look at this again, now we take the fraction 7 code that we just did, and we map out the binary code within it. So we follow 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1. And you see the geometric shape that is created is the same. And this shows you that little bit of similarity between the number 7 and the number 2. So there is a similarity, there is something connecting them together that we may not completely understand, but we see this reflecting here. Now, I would love to say this is the only place that these reflect, but they do reflect in so many different ways, in so many different places, that it can't be ignored. So we have this synchronicity within these numbers that they are always pairing with other numbers. Now, this is not to say that they can't go with other numbers. This just means that there's an inherent quality of nature or quality of energy in relation to that numeric system. And if we look at things in relation to now the spiritual side of this, everything has a level of consciousness. Everything has a level of thinking. Now, if you don't understand what I mean by that, if you observe, and this is observed in the slit experiment, when you're observing the way that they shoot protons out of into a panel, in a sense, and there's certain slits that are cut out. Now, when they're observing the protons, they shoot it straight, and that proton, in a sense, will just go straight, and it'll hit the other side exactly where the central slit is, because that's where it's aiming. But what happens is when you take away the observer, they will go wherever they want, and they will go through the other two slits, and they will span out whichever direction they so choose. So there is a level of coherence, there's a level of consciousness in the proton that is when it's being observed, rationally thinking, we would think if we shoot the bullet out of the gun, it will go straight. And so what happens is the proton follows that direction. It goes straight when being observed. But when not being observed, it does whatever it wants, and then it goes through the other two slits. And so that slit, the double slit experiment, is a very important thing to understand in the relationship of consciousness, is that consciousness, when observed, does at the atomic structures around us do very interesting things. Now, to give you another perspective, they took, for example, a vacuum chamber. This was another experiment, and they sucked out all of the air, and they wanted to study the photons, the light particles within the vacuum chamber. And they were just erratic and pretty random, nothing happened. But then out of, for whatever reason, they placed a little bit of a cell, some skin cells, some DNA, something of the scientists decided, I'm just going to put something in there, and they did it again. And what happened was that the particles, the atomic structures, sorry, the lights above me are just flickering, they would they created the helix, the double helix, like they created the shape of a double helix. They structured themselves in that manner. So by being exposed to a bit of DNA, they started to form in the structure of a DNA spiral. And maybe I'm paraphrasing this because it's just based off the memory of when I read this back in the day. But just to show you that the observation and the exposure to something changes the quality of what is being perceived. So by understanding this, we can then perceive that everything in some way, shape, or form has a level of consciousness. And if we understand this in relation to not only the world around us, but in relationship to everything around us, the atomic level, we are made up of billions and billions of atoms. Okay, we are made of stardust, if you want to follow Carl Sagan's quote. All of those atoms are conscious in nature. We have just combined them all into a physical form, and then we have a level of consciousness that controls our body. We are conscious beings. But what level are we the culmination of all of these atoms living as a single-celled organism, or a multi-celled organism living as one being in a sense? Or are we one consciousness living in a multicellular structure? It's an interesting sort of thing to think about. It might be a little bit mind-boggling for you, but have a think about it in that sense. So what we have now is we can see, as I said, through that numbering little example that I gave you, is that when we take certain things and we observe them, and in their nature, in their natural aspects, whatever happens, they have a significant understanding that they pair with specific points. They are polar opposites of each other. Now, as I said in that previous video, if you want to have a look at that, when I followed through all of the different cycles of numbers that I created in relation to the Fibonacci sequence and the way that they generate across that 24-spoke wheel. And that 24-spoke wheel is very important. But we have that polarity. We can see a clear polarity between those numbers. Now, if I was the only one doing this, I would say, okay, it's just a bit of an interesting thing that I found. But I'm not the only one that has observed this. There are thousands of people around the world that are observing the same thing. There are PhD scientists that are also looking into this. There are quantum physicists that are also looking into this. For example, I have a book here by a man named Robert Edward Grant, who talks about the degradation of atoms when an electron becomes a proton, and so on and so on. And he dubbed those numbering. He numbered the protons and electrons in the exact same way, where he took the opposite ends of each other and he labeled them with the exact same numeric system of opposites, where 1 and 8, 2 and 7, 4 and 5, 3 and 6, and 9 being a reflection of itself, 9 being 0. And it's important to understand that when we look at the world around us. Now, We can delve this even further. We can go into 8-element theory. We can go into the way that the universe is structured, the mathematical constructions of the world itself around us. We can go into TCM theory and the Taoist theory and all of these sort of things. But in the end, what we see is we see complementary systems working in unison. And when we have this understanding of the world around us, when we see that nothing is good or bad, it is just a perspective that you are observing it from. For example, I am in lockdown right now in Melbourne. Okay, it's just perspective. For me, lockdown can mean one of two things. It can be very detrimental to my business, which it is, and it would then spiral me in a negative mindset to say, okay, I need to stay alive, I need to stay afloat. How can I thrive? How can I do this? I can't move, I can't breathe, I can't think. And I could throw myself into this perspective. But at the same time, you also have a level of breathing room. Now, for anybody who knows me, in the sense of the world that I live in, this universe I live in, the way that I live my life, it can be very chaotic and very busy at times. And so this lockdown has also given me the opportunity to take a breather and to recalibrate my thoughts, to find some peace and quiet in a sense. So it can be perceived as two different perspectives. It can be peaceful or it can be chaotic. It depends on my level of experience and perspective, that which area I want to follow, which path I want to follow. So my perspective will change my outlook on my life. So for me, I can see both the good and the bad of this. However, do I agree with it? Hell no, obviously. But the point is that I'm not going to get bent out of shape about it, because there is some positive to it. There's always a positive to a negative. There is always a complementary opposite to something if you can see it, if you have the ability to slow yourself down, take a moment and observe the world around you, observe the universe around you, and find its complementary opposite. And in doing so, you can move forward in life and not be stuck by it. So that concludes my video for you in relation to polarity. There is so much more I could talk about in relation to this, but I thought I'd just touch on a few topics, a few little pinpoints to give you a perspective, a different perspective of looking at the world that we live in. And in doing so, maybe you will find something that I didn't even see. Maybe you will come to a realization that then allows you to better your life. And that's my goal here, is to give people different perspectives, different opinions, different insights in order to broaden your horizons. Now, if you don't agree with anything I said here, by all means, I'm not telling you to. Everybody, and that's the beauty of it, everybody is entitled to their own view of the world, and you can perceive this world however you want to. There are so many different ways you can look at it, but giving yourself the ability to look from a different lens can also give you a different perspective to take. It may not always be the right perspective, but in order to understand which way you want to go in life, you need to have that perspective. You need to be able to step out of your body, step up, above, look from a bird's eye view and look at it. If I go this way, what's going to happen? Am I going to get more of A or less of B or less of C or more of D or more of E? And what happens if I take this route? Or what happens if I take this route? And so it's important to understand polarity in the world that we live in, as well as to understand polarity in our body and to understand how it affects us, not just as a social economical thing, but not just as a nature aspect, but as a universal law, to understand that nature of the world around us and the universe around us has polarity. It has a positive and negative, but it also has a central unifying quality. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening. I know it's been about 30 minutes there, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll probably share a little bit more on this topic later as we go. Bye for now.